Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Muncer. As always, I am your host. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 11th series exploring the evolution of man-made monsters. We've taken a little break for a few weeks off the back of a mad October, and next week, normal service will resume. We will continue our man-made monsters series with Demon Seed and the Stepford Wives. That's going to be a really fun discussion with Alexandra Helen Nicholas, so stay tuned for that next week. But this week, we're bringing you a little bonus episode because, I mean, how could I resist covering another Frankenstein movie that has just dropped, directed by the one and only Guillermo Del Toro. Now, obviously, for people who have listened to the Man-Made Monsters season so far, they've heard me cover a whole bunch of different Frankenstein adaptations, from the Universal movies to the Hammer movies to the Kenneth Branagh version, and we got loads of requests from listeners and audience members to cover this new film, so I thought, why not? So this week, we are simply going to be talking about Guillermo Del Toro's Frankenstein, which is out on Netflix right now. We will be talking about this film in spoilerific detail from the start. So I sat down with friend of the pod, Chris Newton, who is, of course, a huge fan of Frankenstein. He joined me earlier on in the series to discuss the original Mary Shelley novel. It's his favourite novel of all time, so I was very intrigued to hear what he made of this new version. Enjoy. A big welcome back to Chris Newton. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I mean, who else could I possibly have had back for this chat? You know, it had to be you, Chris, because, of course, you joined me on the podcast just a few weeks ago to discuss Mary Shelley's novel, of course, one of your all-time favourites. So, yeah, I've been so excited to discuss this movie with you. And I believe you've watched it 3 times already by this point. Is that right?
I've seen it 3 times now, yeah.
Yes!
Tara and I were lucky enough to see it in the cinema. It had a very limited release over spooky season, but we were straight to the cinema. And oh my God, what a roller coaster of emotions it's been. And I've found something new in it every time I've watched it. So yeah, I'm so thrilled to come back and talk to you about it. As if people haven't heard me talk enough about Frankenstein.
I love it. I love it. No, I mean, this is going to be such an interesting conversation, and I think already from what I've seen, the reaction to it from different people has been quite varied, right? It has been sort of
really varied,
and I can see why. And I think we'll get into all of that. We'll go kind of full spoilers with this. I mean, everyone sort of knows the story of Frankenstein anyway, don't they? So I feel like we don't need to kind of tiptoe around spoilers for this particular chat. I guess I want to start by sort of before you saw it, and we did talk a little bit about this in our original chat about the novel. How excited / trepidatious were you about the news that we were getting a new film, it was going to be a Netflix movie, and it was going to be directed by Guillermo Del Toro? Like, how did you feel about that news generally?
I think it's so funny now, going back to our original chat when you asked me about, you know, my favourite adaptations of Frankenstein, and I said, well, there hasn't really been a faithful adaptation of Frankenstein. And we talked about how different the James Whale films are, even though they're marvellous, and how, you know, I'm not a big fan of the Kenneth Branagh, De Niro, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And it's quite funny, I'm pretty sure I said in our chat about the book that it was unfilmable.
Yes.
And yet, and I was so... And I think we were both kind of cautiously optimistic. And you said, Mike, that Del Toro would get the tragedy of it. And you're absolutely right. And we'll come on to it. But I think... And like, as we said, he's one of those filmmakers who understands the monsters, and he loves the monsters. And yet I was very trepidatious going into this. I refused to have my hopes too high because I thought that way madness lies. So I went in really expecting to be disappointed and did not expect to come out of the cinema weeping.
Oh my God. Oh, well, that's very exciting. I've got more to ask you about that. But yeah, same generally. I mean, it felt like a kind of perfect fit, didn't it? Guillermo Del Toro, as we all know, he's been the director who not just kind of tells beautiful kind of gothic horror stories, but also he's the guy who famously kind of loves the monster, doesn't he? He kind of, he has the love for the monster, for the outsider, for the weirdo. And so in some ways this felt like the text, you know, for Del Toro. And I've been a bit up and down about some of his recent output. I mean, I love... For me, his best stuff is still Kronos, Pan's Labyrinth, you know, some of his earlier work. But I've loved a few of his more recent films. I've loved some of the others less. What are your thoughts generally on Del Toro's kind of output, particularly over the last 10 years or so?
Yeah, same, exactly. I mean, for me, he was one of those filmmakers that was a bit like Tim Burton with his early works, another, kind of dark fairy tale filmmaker. And you get things like Edward Scissorhands, which cannot be beaten. And for me, Pan's Labyrinth was just such a triumph that I thought, nothing's going to beat that. And does Frankenstein beat that? I don't know. It's a very different film, but it's got that same darkness, that same fantastical element. And he's seen the fairy tale at the heart of Shelley's story and put that on screen. And I'm amazed. But like you, I can't say like I was a diehard Del Toro fan. I liked his stuff. But earlier I'd kind of tailed off, to be honest with you. And when I thought, okay, he's doing Frankenstein, let's see. Mm-hmm. But wow. And now in hindsight, who else was going to make this film? He was the perfect fit. And I believe he'd been wanting to make this for ages. And this is something we talked about, Tara and I talked about on From Page to Scream. How isn't it interesting that this year has been kind of bookended where we've got Eggers' Nosferatu and now Del Toro's Frankenstein.
Yes.
And they're projects that both of those filmmakers have been talking about for years, it seems. And yet they've all come together now. And it's that weird cultural zeitgeist of it's Dracula and Frankenstein yet again for some reason.
I know. Isn't that strange? And again, even that time difference of Dracula first or Nosferatu first and then kind of towards the end of the year Frankenstein, it's like we're reliving 1931 all over again, basically. It's really strange. I guess the gothic monster is back, right? It's back in fashion again in the horror genre, isn't it? Which is kind of exciting, especially for people like you, Chris, who love this kind of stuff.
And we see ourselves in the monsters. And it's really interesting. We talked about that, about why is it that the Frankenstein myth will not die? And I think it's, it's a story about the monstrous, and it's a story about outsiders. And it's really interesting to look at Frankenstein's creature in cinema throughout the ages and about how we've treated and regarded the other and the outsider. And we're in sort of full spoiler territory, I guess. So I'm just going to come out and say that I think Jacob Elordi's creature is the definitive portrayal of Frankenstein's creature. I am blown away.
Oh my God. I mean, all right, let's get into it. I want to hear your overall thoughts. I mean, I think people could probably guess already by the sounds of it, Chris. You're very positive on this movie, right? What did you think of Del Toro's Frankenstein?
I loved it. It's my film of the year. I mean, it's even beat Sinners. I thought nothing was going to top Sinners, but then this came along, and as I say, I've loved it more each time I've watched it, because I went in really not knowing what to expect. And there are, me, I'm a diehard fan of the book, and there are a lot of changes character-wise and plot-wise, but I don't feel at any point that it deviates from the tone of the book or the heart of the book. So to me, it's a completely faithful adaptation in terms of, its heart. But the first time I watched it, I spent about the first hour of the film thinking, where's this going? What's happening? I was so intrigued, and it really teases the monster. And it's funny because they somehow managed to market this film without really showing us Elordi's creature. He's kind of hooded and shrouded, and again, a bit like Nosferatu, funnily enough, that they've both given us sort of these quite bold reimaginings of very, very iconic horror figures, and they've kind of kept them in shadow on their marketing. It's almost like the allure is, well, come and see the film and see what the monster looks like.
Right. I love that.
And again, we talked about the fact that the creature isn't really described in the book. We just get the yellow eyes, the long hair, and he's really big. And Elordi ticks all of those boxes. And I've heard some people complaining that he's too handsome or whatever. And I find that quite funny, because it's going back to our original conversation about the book. And we said, well, what is ugliness and what is monstrousness? And we were talking about the creature is so much more complicated than just being an ugly monster. We talked about him being sort of fundamentally wrong and fundamentally outside. And I know people have complained about the way that the creature looks in this film, but the way he acts, the heart he brings, his tortured outsiderness. It's just, sorry, I'm just talking about the creature. Let's talk about the film as a whole.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got loads to dive into with this, but I will just echo your thoughts. I really, really enjoyed this movie as well. And I was a little bit trepidatious. I don't know why. I was a little bit, maybe it's because I've watched about 15 Frankenstein movies this year, but also, like I said, I was starting to get a little bit worried that Del Toro was starting to lose his magic a little bit for me.
Yeah.
And I'd heard mixed things about this movie. I actually came to it quite late. It's been such a crazy month for me that I missed all of the cinema screenings, and I did have to watch it on Netflix. I watched it on the small screen at home. Although actually I wasn't at home. I was having a bit of time off last week, and I went and took myself away to a little cabin in the woods, and it was really gorgeous. And in some ways it felt really perfect, Chris, because I was sitting there was a kind of howling wind outside. I had a roaring log fire next to me, and then I was sat cozying in watching this gothic classic, so it kind of felt perfect in that regard. It felt very cozy,
It's the perfect way to watch Frankenstein. You may as well have been on the shores of Lake Geneva.
Yeah, exactly.
With Byron and the others.
and do you know what? I got absolutely swept up in it. And I think that I can understand a few people's different reservations with it, that maybe it kind of, and again, we can talk about this a lot, because I think, like you say, maybe this is more in keeping with the novel, but it doesn't go maybe as hard on the horror as some people would like.
No.
Maybe it's a little bit more romantic than people would want it to be in some regard. It looks quite glossy. It's got that kind of Netflix look to it. If I had one criticism, it would be that. It would be that I wish it looked a little bit darker and gnarlier, maybe. Yeah. That's the one part, and I actually preferred this to Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, but that's the one thing I would have lent more in the Robert Eggers direction in terms of the way it looked. I mean, not to the point where it becomes German expressionism, but just a little bit more shadowy, maybe. It kind of has that Netflix kind of gloss and sheen to it. But I thought the storytelling and was maybe one of the best I've seen of any Frankenstein adaptation. I think it's brilliant. I think you're exactly right, Chris, that it stayed faithful to the novel in tone, and the changes that it did make to the story, I actually thought were really smart. I think they did a really good job. I dare say there were some things about the story that I actually think worked better than in the original text, and I was like, I really get why Del Toro has done this. It makes a lot of sense. So I loved that.
It reminds me so much of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Right.
Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, in that, on the one hand, it's incredibly faithful to the novel, and yet it brings more romance and heightens everything. And yet you come away thinking like, well, do I actually prefer that version?
Yeah.
And so you get this kind of love story. Well, no, you've not really. It's more than a love story, but you get this romantic element with the connection between Elizabeth and the creature. And I mean, where do we even begin with that? How amazing is Mia Goth in this film?
Incredible. And I want to go through all of these performances with you properly, one by one. But let's just start, first of all, with the broad strokes of the filmmaking itself.
Absolutely.
What did you think of Del Toro, the visuals, the way he brought this story to the big screen?
So impressive. And you know what? More impressive every time I've rewatched it, because once you know what's coming, you start to notice little visual cues, and little references, little nods, even down to the fact that Victor's always drinking milk. Which you kind of vaguely aware of first time round, and the red gloves and Elizabeth's outfits. It's like it's so skillfully done. But I see your point about it being possibly a bit too glossy. But we've had so many dark, gnarly Frankensteins, especially the Branagh one, that I think this kind of it literally brings the story into the light. And you're right, it's not particularly scary. It doesn't have many horror elements, because I don't think Del Toro was interested in making a horror film. I think he wanted to make a fairy tale, and that he gives us this kind of a very sort of technicolor palette that's still sort of fundamentally very gothic. I actually thought it had some really strong Hammer vibes in terms of that, how bright it is with all those costumes, and yet it's still gothic.
Yeah, that's a perfect comparison. And actually, I'm sure you spotted them immediately, Chris. There were a couple of overt references, visual nods to Hammer's Curse of Frankenstein.
I loved it. The eye.
But yes, exactly, the eye, the shot in the eye. Loved seeing that. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think as a horror fan, there is part of me that goes, oh man, I wish it had gone a little bit grittier and grainier and darker.
Yeah.
But that's clearly not what Del Toro was setting out to make. That's not what he was going for, and what he went for, I think he achieved really, really well. And again, I actually think that the way in which, because it's a long film, it's like 2.5 hours, but I I feel about the experience of watching this is kind of how I feel about watching Doctor Sleep, which is like, I really love just like cozying in and going with this story and just like going on this long epic journey that it was taking me on. You know, it's almost like I could see myself watching it on Boxing Day in the future. You know, that's kind of what it felt like to me.
Oh yeah, it's definitely one of those kind of films. Absolutely. Yeah, and it rattles along, doesn't it? For a long film, I think because it's so neatly divided up into, you get the prologue and Victor's tale and the creature's tale, that it's you really kind of, like you say, you don't resent it. You just swept along. And I think because there is such a kind of, not exactly a tonal shift, but there is a real burst of new energy when we get to part 2, that it almost feels like not a different film, but it doesn't feel like it's dragging at any point. It's just like, I wouldn't change a thing about it.
No. And I think, like, do you appreciate what it did in terms of what it focused on more? Because it felt to me, from memory, from the book, from when we discussed it, we spend a lot of time in the first, let's say, 2/3 of the book.
Yeah, I would.
Less time on the final third, right? He kind of strips down a lot of what happens in the final section of the book, right? When they end up in London and Edinburgh, Scotland and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Oh, we talked about that, didn't we? How Shelley's original idea was for a short story, and then she kind of padded it out to become a novel. And there is quite a lot of let's go here, let's go there, but all the while the creature is following.
Yes.
None of that. And it gives, like you say, it gives so much time to not just the creation of the creature, but Victor's backstory and everything in Edinburgh, that I was surprised that you're watching the film, you think, God, we're about an hour in, and I think we're only on chapter 4 of the book.
Right.
And again, that's one of those things that when I saw it for the first time, I thought, I'm not sure how I feel about this. When are we going to see the creature? Who is this Harlander character? But I think, like, once on my second watch, when I knew where it was going, I just learned to kind of just love all those elements. And I love the fact that he set it in Edinburgh. And I don't exactly know why he's made that change, because I think it's actually Germany, because Victor goes off to uni to study whatever it is he's actually studying, monster making.
Right.
And Edinburgh is just such a perfect location, because you have that kind of the Burke and Hare connotation of the the resurrection man and it's science students needing to obtain cadavers to do their experiments with. It's kind of there's something in Edinburgh, isn't there? And we've even there's the famous Frankenstein bar on the bridge in Edinburgh. It's the Frankenstein city.
Yes, completely.
It feels so right to be there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really appreciated all of these little changes that he made in a way that made the whole story just really flow, I think, in a really perfect kind of way. The way that he structured it, like you say, that we spend the whole first hour really just on the character of Victor Frankenstein, really. And I can't wait to talk to you about that, actually. And then that we get to spend the whole second hour essentially with the creature. And then the last half hour kind of wrapping things up as they go head to head, right? And that is kind of generally the structure of it.
Perfect.
So it is perfect. I think he got to the nub. There's that beautiful line at the beginning, isn't there, where where Victor Frankenstein is about to tell his story, and he says some of it is fact, some of it isn't, but it is all true.
But all of it is true. Yeah.
Right. And I guess that goes back to what you said about this being an adaptation, where some of it is faithful to the book, some of it isn't, but all of it feels true to the book.
Exactly. I picked up on that first time and thought, is that a bit of a meta comment on the fact that, look, this is not the Frankenstein but it's the same story.
Right, exactly.
But also it speaks to that element that we talked about in our discussion of the novel about Victor, or rather Walton, as an unreliable narrator, because it's like even in this, it's kind of a story within a story.
Yeah.
Not to the extent that the book is, but it's that idea of like, well, this definitely happened, but now the events are trickling down through several narratives, so it might not be. But that's the most fairy tale thing ever, isn't it? Say that, this isn't real, but it's true.
Right.
But I loved that. I loved that element to it. And again, with the book, people slag off the whole Captain Walton and the letters.
Yeah.
But I think, they use that element in this film and really make it work with that prologue. Except it's not Walton in the film; it's Lars Mikkelsen, isn't it? And he's playing as Captain Anderson. I think they've called him in this one. I'm not. And there are other changes that I'm sure we'll come on to. But again, I think it feels like a way of showing us, look, we're not trying to do Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is Del Toro's Frankenstein. So it's not. It exists in its own world, and just be at peace with that and accept it and go with it. And yet, for all of that, it is so faithful.
So I really want to start by asking you about, let's talk about the characters, and I've got to start by asking you about Baron Victor Frankenstein, because I had you in my head.
Yes.
I had you in my head, Chris, throughout watching this, because I remember, and I've heard you talk so much on both your podcast and when you came on mine, about how the character of Frankenstein, you said he's kind of a dick, right? And he is, and that's not always the case in a lot of the films. But I think they did a brilliant job here with this character of Frankenstein and the way Oscar Isaac played him, right? What did you think of him?
Oh my God. You know that my favourite Victor Frankenstein was Peter Cushing.
Yeah.
Peter Cushing, probably my favourite actor of all time. But I think, am I going to say this? I think Oscar Isaac might have gone one further. I think he might be the best Frankenstein. And of course, there are two actors, aren't there? There's a younger version of the character who I'm not sure the actor's name, but when we're first introduced to him, and you get Charles Dance as his kind of pushy and abusive father, I felt like, oh no, they're doing a Branagh. They're giving us a tragic Victor who's this, this noble hero who wants to conquer death. But no, it actually goes somewhere much darker, I think. And I said this on From Page to Screen, and I can't believe I'm saying it, but I think that the Victor Frankenstein that Oscar Isaac portrays is actually a worse human being than the Victor Frankenstein of the book.
I think so. What I really love is that what was maybe hinted at more subtly in Shelley's novel is really front and center here, that this guy is a fucking narcissist. He is he is a nasty, vain, self-obsessed, narcissistic piece of work, right? And that's information kind of trickles in, because I think you're right, when you get that childhood story, and as soon as I saw Charles Dance was playing the father, I was like, oh no, he's gonna be a mean dad.
Oh no.
Yeah. And of course he was, and of course they made this version of Frankenstein's father a real nasty, abusive dad as well. I thought that was great. I liked that backstory, but I really liked, exactly as you said, Chris, you begin by thinking, oh God, they're going to give him this kind of like tragic, sympathetic backstory.
Yeah.
No, there is something far more sinister and complicated about him as a character, isn't there? And I really loved that. Yeah.
We talked a lot about in the book, what did Victor actually intend? What did he think was going to happen? That he's so fixated on body parts, and he creates this thing, and then when it comes to life and when it actually regards him, he reacts in horror and basically runs away from it. He can't believe what he's done, and he's just absolutely, horrified. Whereas in this film, his reaction is not horror. You get the brilliant shot of the four-poster bed and the creature there and him, but he doesn't sort of flinch or recoil. Like he is just curious at first, and you think, what's going on here? But then he becomes frustrated with the creature and starts kind of brutalizing the creature and abusing him, and you realize, like, oh my God, he's become his father. It's that whole, that idea of like generational trauma, and like the abused has become the abuser. And he blames the creature for so many things that aren't the creature's fault, and you think, my God, this person is just evil. And there's even the scene where it's a very, very dramatic, very gothic, very Del Toro shot of Victor in his long robe on the stairs with holding his candelabra, basically saying that, well, now I'd done it. What was left, I just felt nothing.
Right.
You think, God, it's not even revulsion, it's just boredom.
That's exactly what it is, right? It's the classic monstrous, it's the kind of classic kind of cliche, I don't know, dad type character who's gone, oh no, I didn't actually want this. I'm gonna absolve myself of these responsibilities. And I love the fact that to begin with, there's that kind of moment in the book and in a lot of adaptations that always almost seems quite sudden and jarring, where he's created this thing and the second the creature wakes up, he goes, what have I done? Oh my God, this was a mistake.
Oh
right?
no,
whereas
it's a monster.
Yeah, whereas it doesn't quite happen in that way here. When the creature first comes to life, there is this moment of sort of love and celebration between the two of them, right? Yeah. And then slowly Victor gets, like you say, just more and more bored. He's like, oh man, this guy's actually really, a pain in my arse that I have to raise him as a child. It's like he didn't think of the consequences that now he has a life to raise and look after, right? And he's too selfish to give a shit about that, essentially.
There's the scene where William asks, is it intelligent? And he basically implies no.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, what did he think, that it would just be born as an adult and it would be eloquent and articulate and intelligent and they could work together? And I think once he realizes he has to actually be a parent to the life he's created, like you say, he doesn't want to know, and all the creature will say is Victor,
right? Which I think is brilliant as well, because I think to begin with, that to him really appealed to him and his ego, right? He's like, I am this creature's whole world.
Yeah.
Incredible. To the point where at the very end of the film, he's like, say my name in the way that you first said it when you
Please
were first
say my
born,
name.
and you thought I was everything to you, kind of thing. Yeah. But then after a while, he gets really sick of that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
But he also, the thing that really triggers him is when the creature says Elizabeth, right, as well. So
right, his second word. It's just that it's pure Victor Frankenstein. Every iteration of the character, that moment where he says, he's going to burn down the tower, and he's planning to murder the creature, and he says, basically, I'll spare your life if you say anything but Victor. If you just say one word, and the creature does say one word, but it's not the word he wants to hear,
right?
And he's sort of, it's his jealous rage, isn't it? He kills the creature, or tries to kill the creature, because it said Elizabeth's name.
It's brilliant. And I tell you what, I've always thought Guillermo Del Toro is incredible at these kind of villainous men, like whether it's whether it's the fascist in Pan's Labyrinth or Michael Shannon in The Shape of Water. I think he's brilliant at doing sort of narcissistic, dangerous men, I think, toxic men. And he's done the perfect job, I think, here with Frankenstein. And I also think Oscar Isaac brilliantly camps it up in a brilliant way as well. Having that, I've always loved Oscar Isaac, but he is having the time of his life, I think, playing this character.
the way he chews his words. Sometimes in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where Dennis goes sort of full narcissist psychopath and sort of puts on a sort of quasi British accent. I got Dennis Reynolds vibes sometimes.
Exactly. It's so good, so good. So I think the character of Victor Frankenstein was just brilliantly done, like really, really well observed.
Yeah, perfect.
What about then this character of Henrik Harlander, played by Christoph Waltz? This was a really odd decision, and for a good chunk of the first hour of the film, I was like, why is this guy here? Why is Christoph Waltz in this? Right? Well, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I was feeling exactly the same way, and I can't say now that I love the character and I can justify or defend his inclusion in the film. It makes sense from a narrative perspective. He's the financier of the whole insane project, and I guess he exists as a plot device to introduce Elizabeth, who we'll talk about. But I feel like he's given quite a lot of screen time, and on first watch, I was a bit, get to the creature, and once Elizabeth was introduced, I want to know more about this version of Elizabeth. I want to know more about her relationship with the creature, and so he kind of, it's funny because Professor Kremper is in it, isn't it? It's Ralph Ineson, I think.
Yeah.
But in a fleeting
very
moment.
Briefly.
Yeah. And in most versions of the story, there is, there's like John Cleese as Kremper, I think, in the Kenneth Branagh one. And then there's, of course, Dr. Pretorius in Bride of Frankenstein. Victor often has this kind of it's not exactly mentor, but this authority figure who comes in and guides him in his experiments and encourages him or facilitates or finances him. So there's always been the space for that character, except, I mean, obviously Kremper's a character in the book, but he's kind of on his own in the novel. But so he seems to be filling that Pretorius shaped hole in this film. Well, I say shaped hole, not that there is a Pretorius hole, because that's a different film, and I don't think it needs that character. But I've come to love everything else in the film so much that I wouldn't change any of it. So I kind of think, like, yeah, have Harlander, fine. I can't really stop thinking of him as Christoph Waltz. That's the only in a wig.
That's the thing. That's the thing. And I blame Quentin Tarantino for this entirely, but I can't help but, when he played basically the same role twice in two successive Quentin Tarantino movies, I then find it very hard not to see him playing that role. And I also kind of don't really know what was Harlander doing? Like, what did he... So essentially he wanted some sort of eternal life, right? Is that what he wanted to get out of it? Because he was dying of, I believe, syphilis, right?
Yeah.
And so did he want his brain put into the creature in order to kind of live forever as this creature, right?
Yeah. So he's an arms dealer who's got loads of money, and he hears about Victor Frankenstein's experiment. So he says, I'll do you really think you can assemble body parts and make a creature, in which case I'll bankroll it. And then right when the electrical storm is brewing that's going to animate the creature, he then reveals that he's dying of syphilis and he wants his brain put in the creature's body so he can live forever. To which Victor quite reasonably replies, but it's affected your brain. I'm not putting a syphilitic brain in an immortal creature. And then in the skirmish, Harlander is killed. He falls to his death. And that in itself is interesting. There are a couple of interesting ramifications from that. One is that Victor blames the creature for this death. He says he attacked him, which shows from a very early stage that Victor kind of hates the creature and will use him as a scapegoat for anything. And also in the tussle, there's a lot of complicated scientific equipment that they use to animate the creature, and there's a big kind of, is it like a lightning conductor, some sort of metal rod that's damaged in the skirmish, which doesn't seem to it's just a bit bent, isn't it? It doesn't seem to impede the animation of the creature in any way. But there is a line later on where Victor seems to blame the creature's lack of development, as he perceives it, on malfunctioning equipment, and it's almost like everything that happens gives Victor an excuse to say, well, none of this is my fault, it all went wrong because of Harlander. So I don't really object to the inclusion of that character, but if I were going to change one thing, it would be that he doesn't really need to be in the film, especially because Victor's so wealthy to begin with.
That's really interesting, and I thought where it was going was that his brain was going to end up in the creature, because in a way what I thought it was doing was like a throwback to the 1931 version, this idea that it's a damaged brain is going to be put into the creature, right? And so I was like, oh, that's what they're doing, they're going to put a syphilitic brain into Frankenstein's creature.
That would have been a very different film.
It would have been very different, exactly. But then when that doesn't happen, I kind of thought to myself, oh, so why was Christoph Waltz in this movie then?
I don't know, is the short answer.
And what do you think of, we talked a little bit about the look of it, but we've got to talk a bit about that lab, the laboratory, and the creature creation scene, because of course you've got to talk about this scene in any Frankenstein movie. What did you think of it here?
I thought it was absolutely gorgeous and perfect, really. In some ways, we're never gonna get past the It's Alive, Colin Clive, original classic. It's one of those things, isn't it? It's a bit like Bela Lugosi's Dracula. It's always going to be there in the pop culture subconscious. And yet we talked about, when we discussed the book, we said that it's so unusual, Frankenstein, because on the one hand it's gothic horror, and yet it's also kind of the original sci-fi story. And I feel that this kind of aesthetically did a really good job of uniting both of those elements. That the tower is so gothic. I think is it like a water plant or something, but it looks like somewhere Dracula would live. And there's the huge sort of Gorgon, what would you call it? Sort of statue, fountain, whatever it is, on the wall, and that gorgeous window. And yet you have all this tech in as well. And I can hesitate to use the word steampunk because this is not a steampunk film. And yet, aesthetically, all the equipment they're using, it's so vague. And again, I feel that captures the tone of the novel, that Shelley never really talks about how Victor does this. He's just his chemical equipment. And I thought, aesthetically, it was actually very reminiscent of Hellboy.
Yeah.
Something about that kind of... it flirts with steampunk, it flirts with gothic, but it's its own thing, really. It's its own style. And I suppose one thing we didn't talk about with Harlander is that he brings some pseudoscience to the process, doesn't he? He presents Victor with not just a means to animate the creature, but to give it life eternal,
yes.
And there's this whole thing about we can use the lymphatic system, and if we energize this particular part, it will cause permanent regeneration. I mean, you could have had Victor discover that on his own, I'm sure, but it's a really interesting, and I guess that's for all the changes we're going to talk about, that's probably the biggest change that Del Toro has made to the story, is that we're told, emphatically, that the creature is immortal. He can be hurt, but he cannot ever die. So you have this kind of sci-fi element to the way that they've kind of brought this being to life. And I love that. Again, you talked about all the visual nods. He's wrapped in bandages, much like Christopher Lee's creature in the Hammer one. But he has the weird mask and the thing over his chest, the kind of the cage almost. It's almost Star Wars-esque.
Yeah.
It's no place and no time, and it's not really it's almost magical, and I love that.
I loved some of the kind of pseudoscience in the first act actually as well. I love the sequence in the sort of classroom or whatever you call it, right?
God,
where he's kind of reanimated a bit of a body and it's kind of come to life. I loved all of that stuff. What we get later in the laboratory as well, with those little kind of like cadavers coming to life and moving.
Oh yeah,
that stuff is just great, isn't it? And actually, again, I think
great.
Maybe the argument that there's not enough horror in this movie is a little bit unfair, because actually there's a lot of body horror in this movie. It goes a lot of body horror on the body horror and gore and
you mentioned the university scene, and to me that's actually the scariest moment in the film, where he has the brain of the shopkeeper and the arm of the carpenter, and he just kind of carelessly just switches it on and uses it for an experiment to prove that there's coordination. And this thing, whatever it is, this reanimated human brain, is obviously sentient and in pain. And he just treats it as a science experiment. It's not a conscious living being to him. It's just stuff. Yeah. It's a bit like the Charles Dance, the father earlier on says to him that there's no emotion in muscle. And Victor just takes that a bit too literally, doesn't he? And doesn't apply compassion to any of his experiments. And the way that once he's proved his point with this cadaver, he just kind of just switches it off without care or kindness. Right. And someone, one of the scholars shouts, this is an abomination. And it is. They should have stopped him.
Yeah, completely. He just has absolutely zero regard for the life of these creatures, right?
Yes.
That's the thing. And it's so kind of callous, I suppose, just so casually callous, isn't it?
Yeah,
all the way through. Again, it's all about himself, isn't it? It's all about his own conquests, and that's it, basically.
He loves showing off to that crowd, doesn't he?
Right, exactly. And of course, then let's talk about Elizabeth, because again, really interesting kind of changes here to the character of Elizabeth here, of course, played by horror queen Mia Goth, who's at her kind of like wispy, wafy best as ever, be a goth, and of course we've talked about this with the novel. It's that kind of slightly strange, slightly creepy thing where she was kind of his sort of foster sister that he called a cousin, but also is a lover / wife, and they've completely changed that here, where he first meets her as his brother William's fiance, right? And clearly is immediately infatuated with her and wants her and is jealous of his brother. What do you think of that, of the changes here made to the character of Elizabeth?
Oh my God, where to begin? I guess we should also talk about the fact that Mia Goth has two roles in this film, because she also plays Victor's mother. which I find really interesting because there's right from the off, there is this massive sort of resentment that Victor has for William. Because, he's so close with his mother, but then when she dies delivering William, I think he feels that she's been taken away from him. And there's something, on the one hand, like you say, they've removed the kind of incest element from the book where he marries his, depending on which version of the book, it's either his first cousin or his adoptive sister. But either way, it's this person that he feels ownership over. And I think it's really kind of psychologically interesting for both of them that William, who's never known his mother, ends up marrying this woman who looks just like her. And then Victor meets his brother's fiance, and it's this woman who looks like his mum, and he's like, oh, you're taking her away from me again. And he just has this sense of entitlement that he feels he should own her. And neither of them, I mean, like William and Elizabeth have no chemistry whatsoever. There are a few scenes where they barely even make eye contact with each other. It's so interesting. It feels very much that Harlander has arranged this marriage of convenience, probably just to get in with the Frankenstein family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting as well is that she doesn't really seem to have much affection for Victor, right, as well. I mean, again, it's not like there's no chemistry with William, but actually there's this immediate spark between her and Victor. I don't know if there ever really is a spark, even initially, is there, between them?
And I think it plays with the audience expectation there, because it's Victor and Elizabeth. Yeah. We know they get together because they do in every other Frankenstein story we've seen. And so it kind of almost flirts with this idea. But, when you rewatch it and you know what happens, she's the only person who really holds a mirror up to Victor. And there's the wonderful scene where, again, you're watching it for the first time thinking, oh, this is them flirting, this is them getting together. But he sneaks into the confessional booth when he's seen she go in, and he puts on a stupid voice, pretends to be a priest to hear her sins. And she said, I've got a confession to make about my brother-in-law. And he says, oh, a sin of lust. And she says, no, of hatred.
Yeah.
And she's got to, he's vain, he's arrogant, he's cruel. She just tells it like it is.
Yeah.
So Mia Goth's Elizabeth is so different to the Elizabeth of the novel, who's a bit of a non-character, really. We never really get to know her. She's just kind of waiting for Victor, and then she's killed.
Yeah.
But we talked so much about Mary Shelley as a presence in the novel, how much of her personality she brought to it. And I really feel that Mia Goth's Elizabeth is kind of channeling Mary Shelley, even down to her hairstyle and her dress. It's like they've made a very deliberate choice to make her look like Shelley, which is interesting because later on her wedding day, even the design of the dress with the lace on her sleeves is very reminiscent of the bride and her bandages.
Right.
And of course the bride was played by Elsa Lanchester in Bride of Frankenstein, who also played Mary Shelley. And there is almost this idea of Shelley's DNA in this thing, and she's Elizabeth Lavenza, I think, in the book, but of course in the film she's Elizabeth Harlander, and again it's that thing of this is not the same character, we're doing something different here. And it almost feels like we're giving you this person who can see the creature, like Shelley as the author could see the beautiful, delicate, gentle soul of this being that everybody else considers a monster. And Del Toro has extrapolated that and put that character in the film and what they have, from the very beginning. And, what's really interesting about this version of Elizabeth is that they describe her as being fresh from convent life. So she's a bit of an Annie Blackburn.
Yeah.
And yet some of her lines, she talks about, searching for something simpler and purer. And she sees that in the creature. She has this really beautiful line about how, I can't remember the exact quote, but basically perhaps, he's not burdened by the sin of man, and perhaps the breath of the creator was breathed directly into him, and she sees him for what he is, which is totally innocent. And of course Victor can't stand that. That idea is purer than the common man, and I'm the villain. He can't bear it.
Exactly. And again, so the opposite to Kenneth Branagh's version of this story, right, which is that and this is so classic Del Toro, that what it actually ends up being is a sort of love story between Elizabeth and the Creature, right? This is the shape of this is the shape of water. This is Hellboy. This is the monster and the woman falling in love with each other. The Beauty and the Beast kind of story, isn't it? And and I love that about it. I think it's beautiful actually, and it gives Elizabeth so much more to do, I think, as well, doesn't it? Rather than, like you say, just being there waiting for Victor or whatever, and then ultimately killed. And of course, the way she dies at the end, we'll get to that as well. But that's really interesting, isn't it, as well? So yeah, I think she's great. And of course, Mia Goth. I mean, like, she has become one of our horror scream queens, hasn't she? Our horror heroine.
She's incredible. She's absolutely incredible. You know, you've seen her in Pearl and you think, well, there's nowhere else she can go. She can't top that performance. But then, I don't know, her lines at the end of this. My God. I mean, I was in bits. It was
really incredible, great, really beautiful. Yeah. So let's then talk about the Creature. So you've mentioned already... This is one of your fave portrayals of the Creature. So Jacob Elordi, and I think a lot of us were initially a little bit skeptical. This like young, handsome actor who we might have seen in things like Saltburn and you know, kind of dramas like this, where he very much plays the kind of handsome, sexy love interest, taking on the Creature. And it's such a difficult thing. It's such a difficult role to play, because I think we all can't help but compare it to Boris Karloff or Christopher Lee. One of the problems I really had, you know, maybe slightly unfairly with the Kenneth Branagh version, was that I couldn't not see Robert De Niro the whole time, you know, and I talked about that. Whereas actually, yes, I agree with you, Chris, that with Jacob Elordi, I thought he was transformative, you know, like really incredible. Kind of like completely disappeared in that role. Really incredible, right? And
he plays different versions of the Creature throughout the film. You know, he plays the Creature as a newborn who you know, and he's definitely channeling Karloff, the way he holds his arms in those early scenes. He doesn't have the coordination. He can't speak, and then he grows, and then we see him almost like a child when he's learning, when he's with David Bradley as the blind man, and then we get him at the end when he's not only kind of incredibly articulate and intelligent, but he's also very powerful by that point. He's just like, you know, hurling the crew around like they're, you know, beanbags. And like his physicality throughout the film changes and evolves. It's an incredible performance, and I love that he's got a northern accent.
Yes, I know. I love that. Funnily enough, I listened to the audiobook last year of Frankenstein, and it was with what's his name, the actor Jamie Bell. Jamie Bell did it in the one I listened to, and he also put on a northern accent for the Creature as well, and it kind of works really well. Like, I quite liked that. But yeah, I agree with you. I loved the way that performance kind of shifted and evolved throughout, and that decision to make him. This must be the strongest, most powerful Frankenstein's Creature we've seen, right, on screen as well. You know, like those moments when you can literally, even in the opening, in the prologue, right, where you actually see him move the ship that's, you know, in the ice and everything. You go, oh, wow, this guy has got, like, superhuman strength, right? And
even that, like, when you're first introduced to him, and you know, they know what they're doing, they make him look like this savage monster. And he's there, you know, he's tearing the crew apart, he's moving the ship. But then when you rewatch it and you know what's just happened to him, the only person who's ever truly seen him and understood him and just recognized him as a person and not a thing has just died in his arms. And he's mad, and that's, you know, that rage there. And also, you know, he never attacks anyone who hasn't shot at him first. You know, and to go back to the book, the Creature has such rage, and he has these, you know, really lengthy monologues about, you know, how he wants to tear things down and burn things and destroy things, and they've done a really good job of kind of visually representing that rage, the way he just like smashes things and hurls people around. It's absolutely wonderful.
Here's the one possible complaint. I don't know. I feel like I need to think about it a bit more. But do you think Del Toro goes too easy on the creature? The fact that, we don't get these moments where the creature does become murderous, where, he famously in the book and various iterations, he murders a child and then he murders Elizabeth and all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Del Toro has done away with pretty much all of that and made this character so pure and sympathetic to the point where he doesn't even have that turning point where he becomes a monster, really, in any way. Like, what do you think of that decision?
Yeah, it's a very deliberate decision, as you say, and it's a big change from the book. That it's quite beautiful because it offers hope. Yeah. It's a really hopeful film. Yeah. That, again, we're doing spoilers, aren't we? Like, he forgives Frankenstein at the end. Mm-hmm. And I think all of that is implied in the book. There is an almost tender moment between them where Walton walks into the cabin and sees the creature leaning over Victor's body, and he just says, he cannot answer me, he's cold. And there is a tenderness there. Yeah. But here, so I suppose one of the other big changes, we talked about how the character of Elizabeth is very different, and William is a grown man in this film. He's murdered as a boy in the book, and he's still killed by the creature here, but in a very different kind of way. He's almost killed in the skirmish. He's collateral, right? And it's a situation that Victor has created. But we talked a lot about how culpable is the creature as a being who's kind of been shunned by society and his parent, and hasn't really been raised or taught properly by anyone. He's been left to his own devices and his own impulses, which he cannot control. But there is absolutely a point where the creature finds William, who is a child in the book and in other versions, and learns that his name is Frankenstein, and says, right, you're my enemy, and I'm going to kill you. And there is no redemption for the creature, really. And even that, that occurs in other versions. Like, you get the Boris Karloff one where he throws the girl in the water. Yeah. It's still, the creature has murdered a child, but we're showing a very different version of it. Like, he's innocent and he doesn't understand what he's doing. Right. Like, what's really horrific about the novel is that the creature knows what he is doing, and he does it. And then he says to Victor, if you won't make me a mate, I will be with you. If you deny me my wedding night, I will be with you on yours. Right. So Victor has the opportunity to save Elizabeth's life, but she dies at the hands of the creature, but because he was so appalling to the creature. But then the book ends with the creature, once Victor is dead, and he has nothing but hatred and vengeance. And now that he has nobody to extract that vengeance upon, that I'm going to go north and build myself a pyre and kill myself. Yeah. Except this creature can't die, so he has to have some kind of hope. So I think on some level, that the film does go easy on the creature, but I think the film is all about seeing the purity of the creature, and that purity and that innocence is there in the book. It's just that he turns away from it. He literally turns to the dark side. He says, I was good, but misery made me a fiend. And exactly. There's hardly any dialogue from the book in the film, but there are little moments. And there is one line where the creature says, something like, if I cannot have love, I will indulge in rage, or something like that. And it's a very similar kind of premise, but very similar concept. And I think the creature actually has a higher body count in this film than he does, right? Certainly in the book. The creature's kills in the book are very sort of cold and calculated, deliberate. He deliberately murders William. He deliberately murders Elizabeth after threatening Victor that he would do so. In this film, he isn't calculating, but he does. He's impulsive and he's very reactionary, and he kills members of the crew, which doesn't happen in the book. But then, when I first watched it, I thought, oh my God, this creature is quite brutal. He's just going around, tearing people apart. But then when I rewatch it, I think, well, they're shooting at him. They've got a bloody blunderbuss. And even the cottagers, in the book, he talks about how when they beat him up, when they see him, they think he's attacked the blind man, so they start beating him. And he says, I could have torn them limb from limb. And he talks about how he wants to burn down the cottage and sit and enjoy the ruin, but he doesn't. He kind of contains it, whereas this creature, again, is possibly even more childlike in that way, that he just has these outbursts of rage that he cannot control. And I think even the cottagers, when the first time he encounters two of them hunting, they shoot at him. So eventually he snaps and literally tears one of their jaws off.
Yeah.
And he kills William in the skirmish at the wedding. I don't know if he kills anyone else, but he's very violent. So I think, yeah, he's definitely got a higher body count in this, but I think it does go easy on the creature in a way. But I think that's, again, it's everything about this film is very deliberate, and it's working towards a very different ending, because the creature, there's a real tragedy in the book, because the creature knows that he's fallen. There's a reference to Paradise Lost in this film too, and a brilliant bit where he's reading Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. But of course, in the book, he's read the Bible, he's read Paradise Lost, and he sees himself as Satan, or even lower than Satan, because he's alone. And he knows that he has become a monster, and that's why he knows he has to die at the end. It is so bleak. Whereas this film, it actually clings to a little bit of hope, and it gives us that hopeful ending. It's a tragic ending, but it has hope. I think that the creature needs to be redeemable in this. So yeah, he doesn't murder any children in this one.
No, exactly. And I think, like you say, every decision is very deliberate, even down to this idea of, in the original book, he says, I will be with you on your wedding night. That idea that he's going to kill Elizabeth. Yeah. Here we have the flip to that, which is that Victor is there on William's wedding night, and Victor kills Elizabeth, right? Albeit accidentally, but I think it's very obvious the flip that Del Toro is giving us here as to who is the real monster of this story and who isn't.
And I love that. Like the adult William in this film is, in some ways a bit of a non-character compared to how big the performances are with Elizabeth and Victor, and obviously the creature. But he has that wonderful dying moment where he says to Victor that he's afraid of him, and he says, "You were the monster." Bloody hell. And again, it just extrapolates that idea from the novel that Victor is responsible for Elizabeth's death. He's not the one who murders her, but he is responsible. And in this, it just takes that to the nth degree. And, you have the sort of almost King Kong moment where the creature grabs the bride, and he's get away from him, he's dangerous. And I don't know, is Victor a bad shot, or do you think he actually wanted to shoot Elizabeth there? Because she's refused him. She said no to him, and he's realized now there's a look between the creature and Elizabeth, and he's jealous. He can't handle it.
Yeah, completely. And by the way, what do you make of those kind of weird sort of dreams and visions that Victor has of that kind of angel, that sort of red angel type?
Yeah, I think it speaks to his sort of God complex, doesn't it? That he thinks he's on some sort of divine mission. And also there is, Harlander's character does have that line about, can you contain your fire, Prometheus, or will you burn your hands? A little nod to the, the novel's subtitle, The Modern Prometheus, that idea of a mortal man playing God, trying to steal the fire of the gods. And I think it's a really good sort of visual way of communicating that idea that he doesn't think he's great. He thinks he's blessed. He thinks he's divine. He's on this, he's on a mission from God. And then you get that brilliant moment later where the face comes away and it's a skull. It reminds me of the moment in The Devil Rides Out where you see the angel of death, actually. But again, it's like that, the dream has turned to dust, and you get moments like that in the book, but I think it speaks to Victor's kind of God complex and how it sours and the dream turns into a nightmare. I loved them. They're very, very stylized, and it wouldn't work in other films, but I think it's so heightened, it's so fairy tale that I think they really, really, really work. Absolutely love them. And again, in terms of the style, the whole wedding scene, it's seeded with William telling everyone to throw confetti everywhere, but you get this ridiculously over-the-top scene, and I love it. It's like my favourite shot in the film, of the creature carrying the bride who's been fatally wounded through the crowd as the confetti falls around them. It's like something from a 90s music video when everything was gothic and high budget, and it's wonderful. And and she says, "Take me with you." you. And I think it's really important that we hear that line, that it gives her agency in that scene. It's not a King Kong moment where she's the damsel who's been abducted by the monster, because Victor is the monster and she says, take me with you. And that shot where they're leaving the wedding together and everyone's backing away in horror.
Yeah.
It's just, that's the film. That's what this film is in a nutshell, isn't it?
Completely agree with you. Yeah, I love that. Let's talk a little bit about, so, you know, like you said, this story is in very particular sections, and we have a real kind of literally explosive climactic end of Act 1, where, you know, Victor kind of blows up the building, you know, trying to kill his own creation, essentially, in that. And that's kind of where his story ends, and then we flip to the creature. And you know, this is a section that, of course, we always see, we always get, we always talk about in any iteration. The creature learning language and learning kind of compassion via the blind man. Here, played by the great David Bradley. Right? What do you think of that kind of middle section where we've got the cottagers and the blind man here?
Is so perfect. And, you know, I think that's the creature's tale. Part 2 is my favorite part of the novel. And I think that the bit with the cottagers always really speaks to me. You know, we've talked about how horror appeals to people who feel like they're outsiders, they're on the margins, and you get a very kind of literal representation of that, where you have the sort of, in inverted commas, normal family living in their house, and then you get the monster, the benevolent monster, but the hidden monster who's kind of in the shed, just peering through and dreaming of you know, what it would be like if they could be a part of society. And the creature has that wonderful line about how for a brief moment the world and I were at peace, or words to that effect. And I think David Bradley is absolutely incredible. I love him to bits, and I had no idea he was the blind man in this. And as soon as he appeared, I was like, punching the air. And I think it speaks volumes that because I'm gonna make a confession now. I've never seen Young Frankenstein.
Oh my God.
And everybody tells me I've got to watch it, and I'm sure and I'm sure they're right. And I think what it is, because I have such love and affection for Frankenstein, that a silly part of me can't bear to see it parodied. And I know that so many people kind of get Bride of Frankenstein and Young Frankenstein mixed up and think that in that film Boris Karloff like spills soup or whatever, and the whole concept of Frankenstein's monster and the blind hermit has been so sort of parodied to death. It's a bit like Dracula's accent. It's kind of, you know, once the Count in Sesame Street has happened, there's kind of no culturally going back from that.
Yeah.
And I was watching the scene where, you know, he's saying, you know, friend, and I all the parodies of that scenario and that exchange was so far from my head that I thought, my God, like, this is so well done that it's managed to just kind of take that original story and tell it in such a pure way that it's kind of, you know, it's like Hannibal Lecter is so parodied with certain things, just like they get to a point culturally where they're never going to be the same again. And I honestly thought that Frankenstein's monster and the blind hermit was one of those things. But it's so powerful. Yeah. And the way he's so nurturing with the creature and patient and kind, and it just, oh my God, to me, I don't know. I love the whole wedding sequence and the creature and Elizabeth, but yeah, the cottagers sequence for me is the strongest bit of the film. It's the one that affects me emotionally the most, because it's so beautiful. It's what could have been for the creature, you know. Yeah, it's definitely the most heartbreaking and emotional section of the film, isn't it? It's really beautifully done. And again, I think this is the thing that some people who just come to this wanting a horror monster movie might be a little bit disappointed with, this middle section of the film, which is so beautiful and emotional. Although then again, it does end with, you know, people being ripped apart by wolves and quite a lot of, and then, you know, the creature tearing apart people limb from limb. Yeah, you know.
So again, we've got that classic Del Toro balance of kind of heart with gruey creature horror, you know.
There's some great violence. Yeah.
Finally then, let's talk about the kind of final showdown between Frankenstein and his creature that comes kind of in the final section of the film. Again, I think this stuff is really great because it goes hard on it, doesn't it? And there's something really satisfying and very climactic about the way the final act plays out. What did you think?
Oh my God, it's incredible. And it's so, I said the novel, which I'm a huge fan of and love, but it can be a bit ploddy in the third part sometimes, whereas this, it's so streamlined. It's just as soon as Elizabeth is dead, it's like, right, we're just going to pursue each other to the ends of the earth now. And we talk about this film going easy on the creature, and it does in some respects, that he's not a child killer and he doesn't murder Elizabeth in cold blood, quite the opposite. And yet we see his monstrous, almost sadistic, vindictive side come out now, and he's got nothing left now. He knows he's going to be alone forever. He knows he can't die, and there's that great line, he says to Victor, you are my creator, but from this day I am your master. And he basically dedicates his existence just to tormenting Victor, breaking his nose and stabbing him, and Victor's pursuing him, trying to shoot him. Oh my God, it's absolutely incredible. But then you get the moment where Victor buys the dynamite, hoping it will destroy the creature, and God, the scene where he just says, well, okay then, and he holds it, and he just stands there hoping for death, and it doesn't come. Instead he gets merciless life, as he calls it. Then it brings us back to where we started, and we find out what the explosion was that the crew of the ship heard. But even that's really clever, because when, as I said, we're first introduced to the creature as this kind of hulking monster. Yeah. And even then he looks a bit scary. He's got some of his fingers are, just bone, and his eyes all exposed, and he looks so monstrous. And then at this point you realize it's because he's literally just been blown up. He's blown himself up with dynamite. Yeah. Whereas actually when we get to know the creature, we see a more sort of beautiful version of him. But just the shots of the creature coming into the tent and dragging Victor through the snow. It's so brutal, the way that they go at each other. Oh my God, I love it.
Actually, and I suppose that one thing we haven't really talked about is the creature makeup. Like, what do you think of the physical design of the creature in this movie?
I think it's incredible because you can see all of his features. It's a lot of makeup, and yet he's not lost beneath it. And I think, it's funny, we talked about, when we discussed the novel, we talked about, what's the best adaptation of Frankenstein before this film came out. And we talked about Edward Scissorhands as a sort of version of the Frankenstein myth. And we say obviously you've got Johnny Depp, who's really pretty, but he's got this kind of, for want of a better description, monster makeup on. And I think you get a kind of similar thing here. Yeah. And yet the way it's done, I was just watching it again last night, and there are different kind of skin textures about his face. He really does look like he's patchwork, and it's so distinctive. Yeah. And even in the college scene, the lecture scene, there is I think a little nod to sort of Karloff, where he says, no, the ligature, he said, no need for crude stitching. He's saying it is assembled from body parts, but he's put them together in a way that there's no stitches, but he is a mishmash. And I love that, different parts of his skin, some of it is kind of almost kind of blue, like different stages of decomposition. Different, he really does look patchwork, and his eyes are sunken, as they are described in the book, and he's got the long hair, and also we noticed he's got the white streak. He's got the bride's hair. Yes. That little nod. There's so many things about his, and even in what I love, when you see him when he's in the dark, but the light catches his eyes, you get the little kind of yellow glow, much like Shelley describes him. So it's quite a feat in a way, because they've managed to be completely accurate to the way he's described in the novel, and yet also create something that's totally original and totally unique to this film. And I just think it's wonderful. That combination of his physicality and the makeup and the effects is just can't fault it.
It feels quite unique. It feels quite different to any of the creatures we've seen previously, and yet there are those kind of lovely little nods towards maybe stuff that we've seen previously as well, you know? And there is a kind of, I can imagine this being quite an iconic Frankenstein's creature look in years to come, you know, the kind of the lank hair and the stitches across the face and everything, you know, those striking looks that Jacob Elordi has anyway, his kind of cheekbones, and he's so tall, isn't he, as well? Like, he was, in some ways, now you see it and you go, God, yeah, he was the perfect choice for that.
He was always the creature. Yeah. He's like 6'5".
Exactly. So there you go. And finally then, how do you find the way in which this story concludes? Again, kind of heartbreaking, isn't it? You've mentioned already that moment when he forgives Frankenstein at the end. Again, you know, maybe for some people a little sentimental perhaps, but like, what did it work for you, that ending?
Oh, it totally works for me. You know, the book is sentimental. The way that, you know, once Victor is dead, the creature has nothing, not even his vengeance, and he's heartbroken, you know. For all their differences, it was his father, you know, and they really lean into that. And, you know, not only, you know, Victor apologizes to the creature and the creature forgives him. It's such a tender moment between them, and he says, you know, you have to live. Because of course when he first reveals himself to Victor, he says, you know, I cannot die, yet I cannot live, or I cannot live alone is what he says, but he is fundamentally alone. He's the creature. And so as I've said, the book ends with him. We don't actually see him die. He just says, I'm going to go off and burn myself. But I always, you know, it was always my pet theory that he was immortal and did survive and would have to live on. And that film, you know, the film is unambiguous about that. So I flip-flop, you know, with my feelings about the ending. Is it like unbearably tragic that he is doomed to be alone forever, alone, unloved, monstrous outside? Or is it offering us hope? Is it saying like he can live?
Yeah.
He can, and he looks at the sunrise, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And there's that when he's first created and Victor takes the curtain down and he recoils, and Victor says, no, sunlight, life, and he encourages him to walk towards the light again, like Karloff holding up his arms towards the light, and you get a sort of little bit of repetition of that moment, except he's weeping, and it's like, you know, is he weeping with joy at the sunrise, or are they tears of despair at you know, having to spend an eternity alone and immortal?
Maybe both. I did see it as a very kind of tragic ending for this poor creature. And actually, that again, it's really smart, I think, that change in making him immortal. Because
I agree.
It makes it all the more tragic. The kind of loneliness and the need for a companion makes even more sense, I think, in this story than any other version we've seen. You know,
it does. And of course, Elizabeth, as she's dying, talks about, you know, to be lost and to be found is if the lifespan of love. And it's that horrible irony for her that all her life she's wanted to find something pure, something wholesome, something worthwhile, and she finds it in the creature, and then she dies in his arms. But if the creature's immortal, even if he found a mate, you know, or found a friend, he would outlive them anyway. And I think he knows at this point that he is doomed to be alone forever, and it's so tragic. But again, meta, because Frankenstein's creature in the James Whale Frankenstein dies, in inverted commas, at the end of that film, but of course then emerges from the wreckage in Bride of Frankenstein. In film, in cinema, the creature never dies. The creature can never die, because for whatever reason, culturally, we have decided that we keep wanting Frankenstein's monster again and again and again. So this film has just said, like, this thing cannot die.
Yeah, absolutely. And
it's
again,
alive.
It's alive, and there is that deliberate parallel, I think, to the vampire myth, right? That suddenly it feels like we're in a vampire story.
Definitely.
This idea of this broody, tragic figure who has to live for all eternity and wants a companion or somebody to share it with. And even that idea of looking at the sunrise, right? But feeling separate from humanity. Yeah. It's like we could almost jump forward 100 years, get a sequel, and see what see what the creature's up to in like the 1990s, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Interview with the monster.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, there you go. Incredible. So I guess I want to finish by just asking you, where does this rank for you in terms of your favourite Frankenstein adaptations? Is it up there with, for example, the Universal movies for you?
That's a really good question. Yes, it is the short answer. I suppose to me, it is the perfect Frankenstein adaptation for me because it captures the heart of the book, which I, as I said, only a couple of months ago on this podcast, I didn't think anyone could do it, but wow, I've been proved wrong and I'm so happy to be wrong. But of course, like objectively, is it as good a film as the Universal Frankenstein? There's something so wonderfully simplistic about that and iconic, and it just it's a film about a mad scientist making a monster. And, everything about it is so memorable. It's so visually striking. The dialogue, does this film come close? I mean, I prefer it because it speaks to, I'm a fan of the gothic and I like vampire films. I like, maudlin immortals wandering around being lonely. Yeah. And it just speaks to that part of me. It's difficult, only time will tell, I think, if it stands up to those other movies. But I mean, the opinion is divided because I think some people want different things from Frankenstein movies. But I think this has really struck a chord with people. Like on Instagram already, I'm seeing so much artwork, so much merch about the creature and Elizabeth, and that quote, "We can be monsters together." I think, it's really spoken to, a certain demographic. I think this is definitely the Bram Stoker's Dracula for the current generation, I think. And I think this film, will become a classic. Yeah, for me, it's up there with the Universal films, absolutely, in terms of being a fantastic film in its own right.
I think it is, for me, I think my top sort of 3, let's say, Frankenstein adaptations, they still remain Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and then maybe Curse of Frankenstein, the Hammer film, I think, as my favourites. And I don't think this one touches those 3, but I think it's definitely up there in one of maybe the best of the last several decades. I mean, I think it is definitely better than the Kenneth Branagh version and all the other kind of various versions we've gotten through the 2000s and 2010s. So, I don't think it's I don't think it's hyperbole to say that this is probably the best Frankenstein adaptation of the last 50 years, maybe. The most successful one, I would say. But, it's hard to say anything definitively when it's this fresh in my mind. And I've only seen it the once as well. So let's see how we all feel about it in a few years' time. But I think generally speaking, I felt that it felt like a bit of a triumph for me, like a real impressive feat, especially in terms of the storytelling, the way he tackled the text and what he did with it, the visuals, and also the performances as well. The performances really made this movie. So, yeah. Well, there you go, Chris. Thank you. What an absolute joy. I'm so glad that we got to discuss this. I'm so glad that I got you back on the podcast to talk about it with me. So thank you so much. And you'll be back again at some point in the future, I'm sure. But until then, let people know where they can find you online, where they can find your podcast if they want to hear more. Chris?
You can find me on Blue Sky at Chris Newton, and you can find Tara and I talking about our favourite horror books on From Page to Scream, wherever you get your podcasts.
Amazing. Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And there we go. That's it for this week. Thank you all so much for listening. One more time, a huge thank you to my brilliant guest, Chris Newton. Well, drop us an email. Let us know what you thought of the new Frankenstein. I know it's been quite divisive. A lot of you out there probably not as big a fan of this movie as me and Chris were. I would love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find Evolution of Horror on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me, Mike Muncer, on Instagram and Blue Sky. We'll be back next week to continue our Man-Made Monsters series. I'll be joined by the brilliant Alexandra Helen Nicholas, and we will be discussing the Stepford Wives and Demon Seed. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.